off your cell phones. Second of all, there are 3 loos, as my British friend calls them, in the building. One is there. Please don't use that during the performance. Or we'll stop the stories and just wait for you to finish, okay? Go out there. There's one up the stairs or around beyond the stairs. So those are where the bathrooms are. I want to thank Christopher, who is behind the bar, and Kim, who's at the door, and Gary, who is our sound person, for being here to serve us. They're all volunteers. Artichoke Cafe is it's a Portland institution, and so we love the space that we get to perform in, and we love the fact that they're here serving you beer, and we hope that you will have mini beers, or because it is a volunteer organization, and they really could use the money and the tips. So just saying that, and also maybe it'll make the show more enjoyable for you. So let's see what. Cards. This card that I'm holding. I want you. If anybody has not filled one out yet, please do, because then we're going to have a drawing at the interval, as my British friend calls the halftime or the intermission, and the winner will get 2 free tickets to next month's show, which is going to be a really fun show. It's about 6 tellers telling variations on Rumpelstiltskin, which is a really interesting story with lots of psychological depth that I think you're going to enjoy a lot. Okay, so anything else? I think I've got everything. I want to introduce my storytellers. I'm, as I've said, Barbara Fankhauser, and Penfound, Julie Strozyk, and Pam Maben. We will be telling you crone tales for the evening, so settle back and relax, and here they come.
Once upon a time, long, long ago, when once there was land and now there is water, and once there was water and now there is land, there lived the Caliac, old and ancient, beyond reckoning. She was the oldest being alive on the earth when first she came to Scotland. She was a crone goddess. She was a Celtic ancestor, and as a Celtic ancestor, she was the keeper, the goddess of wind and cold. And as a crone goddess, she was a fearsome creature, a large being dressed all in gray, with a gray and brown plaid shawl flung over her shoulders. Her face was blue, like a corpse. Her hair was long and white and studded with ice. Her teeth were tusks. She wandered the land and cast down stones. This was before the people came to Scotland, of course, so they were safe, but she flew over the land and flung down these stones, and those stones, they became mountains. She was remarkable. She brought the cold and the winter. She was old and beyond reckoning, and she absolutely came at Samhain, November 1st. The winds were blowing, cold was coming down, and she sent her howling winds down. They tipped over the trees. They sent ice, sheets of ice out over the land. And the Caliac, well, she enjoyed every minute of this. She laughed at those storms. She danced in them like a child, dancing in the rain. But eventually, her winds died down. Then she was absolutely weary. Her bones even ached. She came out and looked and searched until she found the Well of Youth. And there she lifted off the heavy stone slab that covered the well, and she drank deeply. Now she knew, she knew well that she should cover that well back at once, but she was just too tired. She thought she would just close her eyes for a moment, and she sank down on a soft bed of moss. The Kaliak slept. She slept while the sun set and the moon rose, and without that cover, the waters in the well continued to rise until they spilled over onto the sleeping Kaliak, and they began to spread out on the land further and further and further. And with every drop of water, new life came to the land while the Kaliak slept. Now, winters are not as cold as they once were in Scotland, but when the cold winds blow and the snow begins to fall, people still say that the Kaliak, the bringer of life and death, of resurrection and rebirth, the Kaliak, walks the land once more. And now I'd like to introduce Julie Strozyk, who will tell you Old Woman River.
When I was a little girl, and yes, there was a time when I was a little girl, believe it or not, I lived on Seraphan's Peninsula. You've probably never heard of it. Seraphan's Peninsula is a little spit of land that sticks out into the Tualatin River. On hot summer days, the neighborhood kids and me would go down to the river and we would wade out into it as far as we could go. The neighborhood kids, they could swim, and they sometimes went out quite a ways. I didn't swim, not in those days, and I would wade up to my knees. But it felt so good on a hot day. Oh, it was wonderful to feel the current come down and flow around my legs. Oh, marvelous. I would turn and look up the river, and I would wonder what kind of interesting things might come floating down the river at me. There wasn't much to see, just the trees along the banks and, maybe a cow in the pasture. You never know. But I'd watch that way for a while. Then I'd turn and I'd look down the river. And I liked that better, looking down the river. I don't know why. Maybe it was just the idea of knowing that everything flowed on. Everything good, bad, painful, whatever. It was all washing downstream and around the bend where I couldn't see it anymore. Now that I'm older, and I'll be honest, I'm not terribly thrilled about being older, I think about the river a lot. And it makes me feel better sometimes when I'm thinking about my own mortality, the friends that I've lost, the things that happen to you when you get old. It makes me feel better just to relax and imagine that beautiful flowing current. Because everything flows, everything moves. It's not just the old Tualatin River. Yeah. It's the river of life. It takes the good, sometimes it takes the bad, but it all flows down and around the bend. Makes me feel good, and I recommend thinking about the river. If you're having a bad day or just not feeling your best, think about the flow of that wonderful river. I know that someday I'm going to think about the river, and I'm going to walk down there and I'm going to see a little boat, just big enough for one person. I'm going to get in, and I'm going to flow with that current, and I'm going to go down that river, and I'm going to go around the bend. On the way, I'm going to see all the little things that I sent down before. Maybe they'll just be stuck in the weeds somewhere. I don't have to pick them up again. Well, that bad stuff is gone. But the good stuff, that's going to be there too. And those friends that I've lost, they're going to be waving from the riverbank. Hey, Julie, come on. And maybe I'll dock my boat, and we'll have a picnic. It's going to be fun. And until then, all I have to do is think about the flowing water, and I'm going to be much more at peace. You might want to try it yourself. Thank you. And now, Barbara Fankhauser will tell us the tale of the widow and the frog.
This may change the mood a bit. I went out to the stream outside my cottage to get a bucket of water for my morning ablutions and my tea, and out there on a lily pond was a frog looking at me. Now, I'd not seen a frog quite this size before, but he looked at me, and there was something about the frog that just seemed so sad. And he looked at me, and he said, "Please, dear lady, would you be my mother?" How could I be your mother? You're a frog, and I'm a human. And I ran into the house thinking it was some kind of possession or demonic frog. I didn't know what it was, but I had never been spoken to by a frog before, and I did not take to it. Now, the next morning, I got up, and I'd forgotten about it. I sort of put it out of my head, and I had my tea, and I went out and sat on a bench out in front of my house, and I was enjoying my tea in the sunshine, and I had this feeling I was being watched, and I looked over, and there was the frog. And he looked more pathetic than before. He looked at me so sadly, and he said, please, dear lady, will you be my mother?" I said, "How could I be your mother? You're a frog, I'm a human. Where would you sleep? What would you eat?" Well, he hopped a little closer, and he said, "I would sleep on the grate on your stove, and I would eat whatever you eat. For are we not all the same under the skin?" Well, I rushed in and slammed the door. I thought, this is like, I don't think it's a hallucination, but it was disturbing. But I thought about that frog a lot that day, and the next day when I went out to get my water, there he was again. And as I walked out, I saw him, and he just looked so sad and so lonely, and just, I've been lonely like that, and I doubt if there's anyone in this room that has not known loneliness. And so when he looked at me that morning and said, please, dear lady, will you be my mother?" I agreed. Well, he leapt in the air with joy, and he hopped into the house, and sure enough, that night he jumped up on the grate on my stove and went to sleep, which I thought was a little odd, because I always thought frogs liked cool, damp places rather than warm, dry places, but this frog apparently was perfectly happy there. Well, in the morning, I got up. Now, I live on a fixed income, and so I don't have like lavish things to eat. I made these little it's a little kind of dried up little oat cake that I make for breakfast. It's nourishing and cheap. Anyway, I made the oat cakes, and he was eating his oat cake, and I was eating my oat cake, and he said, I'm going into town to get some cheese. I don't know how he knew that. Cheese is like my soft. I love cheese. But I can't afford cheese. But okay. So off he hops, and while he was gone, I got to thinking about this little frog and the wagon wheels and horse hooves and how he could be stepped on or crushed under the wagon. I worried about him until that afternoon he rode into the yard on a mule, on top of the mule, and the mule was covered with cheese. I mean, every kind of cheese you could imagine. It was brie and Munster and Gouda and feta. And I was like, where did you get all this cheese? And the frog said, well, I was in the marketplace, and I was waiting for the cheesemonger to show up. And in a couple hours, he finally got there, and he had the mule with cheese on it. I was so excited, I jumped up on top of the mule and started riding the mule around the marketplace. And everybody got so excited, they all ran away. So I just came home. And I thought, well, no, technically, is that stealing? I mean, with cheese, I love cheese. And well, those people at the marketplace, they've seen frogs, they've seen mules, they've seen cheese. They're all grown-ups. There's no reason for them to run off like that. And so I think they've abandoned the cheese. So I said the cheese could stay, but the mule had to go back to the cheesemonger, and the frog agreed. So the next morning, we were having our oat cakes, but now the oat cakes were swimming in this warm, melty brie. They were lovely. And the frog said, today I'm going to go and get a bride. And I looked at him, I said, where in the world are you going to find another talking frog? And he said, frog? I'm not getting a frog. No, I'm going into town to get a bride. He seemed quite entrepreneurial, so I thought, okay. So off he went. And I didn't worry about him that day as I had the day before, because clearly he knew how to take care of himself. And when he came home that night, he said his bride would be arriving in the morning. And I said, well, great, who are you going to marry? He said, oh, the miller's daughter. Oh, the miller's daughter. Well, the millers were the richest people in town and the haughtiest people. And their daughter was the prettiest girl in town. And it was like, how in the world did you get the miller to agree to let you marry his daughter? And the frog said, oh, I coughed. I said, you coughed? And he began to cough. And when he coughed, this wind came and ripped the roof off my house and was pulling my furniture up. And I said, I see. And he stopped coughing, and everything went back to as it was. And I was going, well, and how did you convince the miller's the wife? And he said, oh, well, for her, I cried. You cried? And he began to cry, and the water rose so quickly, and my table was beginning to float, and I said, I see. And he stopped crying, and the water went away, and it was just as it had been before. I said, what did you do for the miller's daughter herself? How did you convince her? Oh, he said, I laughed. I said, you laughed? And he began to laugh, and flames shot up everywhere. I could see my kitchen curtains just turning into ashes, and I said, I see. And he stopped laughing, and everything went back to normal. Well, the next day, sure enough, the miller's daughter arrived to marry the frog. And now I know that probably some of you people have just stepped out of this story wondering to yourself how in the world a union between a frog and a human might work. And I just want to say, shame on you. It's none of your business, and it will all get resolved. So, stepping back into the story, they were married, and after, everything, and she was very happy that I was there because we became good friends. And so the three of us were settled in quite happy together. And after a few weeks, we heard about a horse race, a 3-day horse race that was going to happen in town. Every day there was going to be a horse race. And when there are horse races in town, there's vendors, food vendors, and there's jugglers and clowns and entertainment. And it's just a very festive thing. And so the three of us decided we would go to the horse race, certainly the first day. And so we set off to go to the horse race, and we were on the way down the road when the frog suddenly said, oh, I forgot to feed the animals. I need to feed the animals. You go ahead. I will catch up. So we went on, his bride and I went on to the fair, and it was amazing. It was amazing. There were all these riders. We knew most of them, but there was this one rider nobody had seen before on this magnificent horse, and he won the race, of course, and then right after the race he disappeared, and nobody knew where he was or who he was, it was just this mystery, and it was like the talk of the town. Well, the miller's daughter and I went back and we told the frog all about it, and he was so sorry to have missed it. And I said, for sure, tomorrow we'll go and we'll see, and maybe he'll be there again. And so the three of us set off the next day, and we were halfway there when the frog went, oh, I forgot there's this break in the fence and some other hardware things. I have to take care of it back at the house, and you go ahead and I'll catch up with you. And off he went. Well, the miller's daughter and I kind of looked at each other, but we went on, and sure enough, the mystery rider showed up again on this magnificent horse. He won the race, and we came back and we told the frog all about it, and the frog was so disappointed to have missed it, he said, and for sure he'd be with us the next day. So the next day, we set off, and what do you think? The frog got halfway down the road, and he said, oh, no, I forgot something. Turned around and went back. But so did we. We turned around. We followed him back to the house. And we got there, and we couldn't see him anywhere. But when we went into the house, we looked, and sure enough, there on the back of the door was hanging a frog suit. Well, the miller's daughter grabbed that frog suit and stuffed it into the fireplace and lit it. And it was just burning up when this handsome young man, burst into the door. I was like, oh, no, my frog suit. Oh. Well, I guess I'll have to stay a human from now on. Which was all right with the miller's daughter. And me too. And, really, as my former frog son said, really, are we not all the same under our skin? Thank you. It's now my pleasure to bring Julie back up here for a tale not by Baba Yaga, but of Baba Yaga. Here. Tricky sandals. There you go. Okay.
When I appear with the Crones, I often appear in my alternate persona of Baba Yaga. I'm not going to do that tonight exactly, but I am going to tell you a story that involves Baba Yaga. So you will be hearing from her. Alex jumped on his bicycle and took off down the old logging road. He was looking along the edge of the road for the place where the path branched off into the woods. He found it, and he got off his bike, parked the bike, and started following the path down into the woods. And pretty soon he came to a clearing. And there in the clearing, sitting on cinder blocks, was a trailer, kind of a single-wide trailer. He walked up to the door and knocked. And there's no answer. So he knocked louder. Hey, is anybody home? The door flew open, and there stood the ugliest woman he'd ever seen in his life. What the hell do you want? She said. He said, I heard in school that a witch lives here. So? Well, I need to have you take care of somebody for me. Take care of them. Go home, little boy. And she slammed the door. No, I'm serious. Come on, lady, open the door. The door opened just a crack. You could see one eye peeking at him. Really, I really need your help. Can't you let me come in, please? Oh. All right, she said. I think you're fat enough. Come in. So he came in. She looked him up and down and said, you could make a good meal. Alex thought, hey, lady, I don't cook very well, so I'm not going to make any meals, but sit down, she said. Tell me, what's your name? My name is Alex. Alexander? Well, yeah, but nobody ever calls me that. I will call you Sasha. Sasha? That's a girl's name. In Russia, Sasha is short for Alexander. Well, we're not in Russia, in case you haven't noticed. When he said that, trailer sort of started swaying in the wind, although it hadn't been windy before. He looked over at the old lady, and she was scowling. Oh, fiercely. He thought maybe he'd better speak a little more respectfully. Well, she said, what is it you want? Who do you want me to kill? Well, I don't really want you to kill anybody. You see, I'm new in town, and I'm new at my school, and there's this guy. His name is Matty Kravchuk, and he's just a jerk, and he's always picking on me, and God, he's always making fun of my braces and my glasses, and usually, he's checking me into the lockers as I walk down the hall. I can't make any new friends because this guy is being such a jerk. I want you to do something to him. I don't know what. I've heard that you're a witch and maybe you could do a spell or something. Maybe, she said. Maybe. Tell me more about this Kravchuk. Well, like I said, he's a real jerk. Can't you talk to him? Oh, I've tried to talk to him. Then I've tried to stand up for myself like my dad tells me to do. Nothing works. Maddie's father is the chief of police here in town, and everybody's kind of afraid to do anything about Maddie, So the teachers, they don't pay any attention, and it's just terrible. So what do you really want me to do? Well, I got some ideas. And Alex reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of paper. Now, there's a lot. I got a few suggestions here. Now, first of all, you could make me really, really good at kung fu, and I could kick his ass. Do you want to kick ass? Well, yeah, that'd be great. No. He would just pick on someone else. What else do you have? Well, you could make him sick, like so sick he couldn't come to school, so he wouldn't be there to pick on me. Would be easier to kill him. Oh, stop with the killing. You're not going to kill him. Well, let me see. What else? Oh, yeah, you could give me a really hot girlfriend, like one of the popular girls at school. And if I was with her and he picked on me, then he'd get in trouble with the in crowd. No. You're not old enough for a girlfriend. I will think of something. Well, come on, there must be something you can do. No, I could do spell, but if I do spell, you have to earn it. Oh, what do you want me to do? Oh, well, for a start, you could wash the dishes. She pointed to the sink. There was a huge stack of dirty dishes in the sink. Well, okay, I guess I could do that. So Alex got up and he went over and he ran the water. Fortunately, there was hot water, and found some soap and started washing the dishes. It was a hard job. There were a lot of sticky things on those dishes, and it took me quite a while, but he finally finished it up. He dried them and he put them away according to where she told him. And then he said, okay, you're going to take care of it now? No. It takes a little while. Come back tomorrow. Oh, all right. So Alex went back the next day. He'd had enough trouble with Maddie that day. I don't know. He'd gotten thrown into the closet a few times, and it was lousy. He was in a bad mood. But she said, all right, Sasha, you were going to dust today. Dust? Yes, dust. And she handed him a little feather duster. He looked around the trailer and he realized all of a sudden she had hundreds and hundreds of knickknacks. Little people and little animals and just all kinds of little things. he started dusting them and started dusting the surfaces and started kind of getting into the crevices. It wasn't easy. He picked up one little gnome and he was dusting it really hard. He set it back down on the table and the gnome sneezed. He was beginning to think that there were a lot of strange things going on in this trailer, but he finished and he said, okay, now you're going to do the spell? Not yet. Come back tomorrow. He was beginning to think this was just a way of this old lady getting somebody to do her housework for her. But he came back the next day. Oh, and the day after that, and the day after that, she had lots of work for him to do. It wasn't easy. He started to make up stories for his parents so that they would think he was meeting with some kids after school. But that wasn't really the case. Anyway, finally he came back one day and he said, all right, now are you going to do the spell or aren't you? I will do spell. In fact, I will do spell probably today. Today is going to be beauty day. I want you to brush my hair. So he took the hairbrush that she gave him and began brushing her hair. When you finish, you can do nails. Your nails, great, sure. So he finished brushing her hair. She got up, she went to the sink, she got a tub of warm water, put it on the floor. It wasn't her fingernails that she wanted done. It was her toenails. They kind of looked like talons. They were not pretty at all. But she soaked them for a bit, and that was not so bad. She gave him a little pair of fingernail scissors, little cuticle scissors. He sawed away at them, finally got them back to a human length, and he was pretty pleased. She seemed happy, too. Oh, this is nice, she said. Thank you very much. Now, make some dinner. You want me to make dinner? Yes. Just go ahead. Make dinner. You have food in the cupboard. Look in the cupboard. He looked in the cupboard. Oh, yes. She had some macaroni and cheese. And he looked in the refrigerator, found some hot dogs. Well, he put it together as best he could, and she seemed very happy with that. Very, very good, she said. You come back tomorrow. I want you to clean up the yard a little bit. All right. So he came back the next day, and he cleaned up the yard. He took the wood, the branches that had fallen from the trees, and threw them back in the woods, and he tried to rake things up a little bit, and as he was working, that was when he noticed that the little path leading up to the door of the trailer, it was lined with these stones. It looked like round stones. He thought they looked really familiar, but he couldn't quite put his name to them. They each had a little sort of zigzag mark on the top of them. But he looked at them carefully, and he got down and brushed away some of the leaves and things that had gathered there and kind of reached down around them. They seemed quite round. Put his fingers down, and all of a sudden it's like his two fingers kind of went into what felt like bowling ball holes. He pulled the stone up. It wasn't a stone. It was a skull. He dropped the skull, ran down the path, picked up his bike, went home. That was it. He was done. She was a murderer of some sort, and he wasn't going to have anything more to do with her, and that was that. He didn't go back for about 3 or 4 days. And then he showed up again at the door, banged on the door. She opened the door. He came in. He was wet. His hair was all wet. His shirt was all wet. He sat down on the couch. All right, he said, I don't care what you do to him. You can kill him if you want. You can put him out there in the garden with your other collection. What do you have skulls in your garden for anyway? Oh, well, I think they're pretty. What do you think? No. Oh, I've had enough, really. I've had enough. You've got to do a spell for me. All right, she said. Very good. I will do spell. You wash the dishes again. I will get spell ready. She went to the end of the trailer where there was a curtain, and she went behind it. He washed the dishes as best he could, got them all cleaned up. When she came out, she said, all right, in 3 days will be full moon. She held in her hand an egg. He didn't know if it was hard-boiled or raw or what it was. And then she said, put out your hand. He put out his hand, but instead of her handing him the egg, she suddenly came up with a needle and she stuck his finger. Now, put finger on egg. He put his finger on the egg and the blood ran down around the shell. Now, she said, in 3 days, you eat the egg, eat the whole thing, and bury the shells. Where am I supposed to bury him? In the ground. It doesn't matter. Ground is ground. We'll be all right. Don't worry. Well, Alex took the egg, took it home, did what she said. 3 nights later, he ate it. Fortunately, it was hard-boiled. The next morning, very, very early, you could have seen Alex riding his bike at a tremendous speed down the old logging road, all the way back to where the path began. He ran down the path. He ran up to the trailer. He banged on the door. Let me in! Let me in! Take it away! Take it off! Cancel the spell! Just stop it! Make it stop! She opened the door. What? You have a problem? Do I have a problem? Look at me. I have breasts, and I don't have what I used to have. Why did you do this? You will see it. Go to school, and your problems will be over. No. Alex was so mad, he just got on his bike. He went to school. And as he walked through the main door, he looked down at the end of the hallway. And there was Matty Kravchuk. Only not the Matty Kravchuk that he knew. No, this was a tall, blonde, not bad-looking girl, just like him. Kravchuk saw him and came running at him and hit him right in the nose. Oh, my God. He couldn't believe what had happened. You had something to do with this, she said. And you did this to me somehow, and you're going to pay for it. Well, they got kind of back into a tussle, and the kids started yelling, catfight, catfight. And finally they stopped. The principal came out, grabbed them both, and took them into the principal's office. Alex was so confused. He had gotten up that morning to discover that he was a girl. And his parents didn't even seem to notice. It was just, oh, hi, honey, how'd you sleep? Everything okay? And his mother even said, you know, you've been wearing those jeans and T-shirts too much. We got to get you some new clothes, honey. We're going to go shopping this weekend. He couldn't believe it. But anyway, there they were, sitting in the principal's office now. All right, you two, he said. You know we have a no-violence policy at this school. Now, you, Matilda, I want you to go to the counselor's office. And Alexa, I want you to go to the nurse's office and get something for your nose. And so they both went where they were supposed to go. He said, after the day was over, Alex just went back to the trailer. The old lady gave him a kind of a compress for his nose, so he felt a little better. But he didn't know what to do. You gotta take this off. You gotta make it. You've got to put an end to it somehow. It's awful. Spell will do what spell will do. I warned you, once we did the spell, there was no going back. No going back until it's done. But I can't stay like this. I'm a boy. Come on. Spell will do what spell will do. Be patient. Be patient. Well, for the next few days, Alexa did everything she had to do at school. She felt kind of bad for not having a bra to wear. The girls made fun of her. And she almost walked into the boys' room, oh, God knows how many times. It was getting pretty rough. She didn't see Maddie for a while, but then when she did, they sort of looked at each other. Maddie had been out actually playing basketball with the boys and doing really well. But she came up to her and said, I'm sorry about your nose. Oh, yeah, it's all right. I'm sorry about all this. Yeah, it's pretty weird, isn't it? Yeah, it's awful. It sucks. It's the worst thing's ever happened to me. I mean, surely you must feel that way too. Well, not really. What? No, not really. Ever since this happened, it's like my dad's been really nice to me, and he not such a hard ass. He really seems to, he treats me nice. He doesn't tell me to man up all the time, It's like it's okay for me to have feelings if I want to, and it's not so bad, really. Well, I think it's awful. I'm going to be really glad when this thing is over. I can't stand it. Anyway, he went home that day, and it went to bed. And in the morning, he woke up, and everything was back the way it had been before. He was delighted. He jumped out of bed. He took off on his bike, went back to the clearing in the woods, knocked on the door. I'm back. I'm fine. That's wonderful, she said. So, what about the crowd check? Well, I don't know. It's weird. It's like he doesn't care that he's a girl. He kind of likes it. I don't get it. Sounds like Kravchuk made a good choice. Choice? I had a choice in this? Well, perhaps. When Alex got to school that day, he saw Maddie again. Maddie was still a girl. Wow, he said. So you're going to be a girl now? You're going to date boys? Well, no, not really. I'm not really into boys. I'm still into girls, but I don't mind being one, It's okay. That's when Alex realized that he wasn't going to get beat up anymore. The problem was solved. He rode back to the trailer that afternoon. So, she said, what do you want? Well, I don't know. I thought maybe I could do something for you. You did a good thing for me, and I could brush your hair again if you like. Oh, she said, well, I'm pretty busy, but maybe you'll come back tomorrow. You can brush my hair, and then you can paint my nails. Oh, he said, you really are evil. And that's my story. And now, the lovely Miss Anne Penfound will tell us a tale of cronies.
Hello. There were once 3 sisters, all crones. There was Miss Claudia, Miss Beatrix, and Miss Annabel. They lived with their brother on a farm in the countryside. One day, Claudia, a vivacious 91-year-old, said she was in need of a diversion. And the sisters just laughed and laughed because when Claudia wanted a diversion, anything could happen. And they said, well, why not? Let's have a diversion then. And so they decided to go to their brother's townhouse in Venice. It was amazing because you could be there and see all the comings and goings in the plaza without being seen yourself. And so it was their delight to go onto the balcony and watch the fashions. I mean, some of them were absolutely amazing. And some, not so much. And then there were the young men. Oh, you should see them. I mean, they would walk down and they would flirt with this one and then that one. And they wore this sort of interesting clothes themselves. And they were very in need of being seen. Now, one day, Claudia was on the balcony by herself and her 2 sisters were making the tea when Claudia saw this young man who was intent on flirting with every single woman that he could flirt with. He was quite nice. He made her heart patter quite a lot. Wow. What she didn't know was this young man was a prince, and he'd just been having a conversation with his father, the king. And his father had told him in no uncertain words that it was about time he stopped his dalliances and got married. Well, the prince liked his dalliances. He enjoyed them immensely. And so he said, I'm not going to marry anyone unless they're the most beautiful woman in the world. And his father said, look, beauty is often skin deep. No, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And with the petulance of youth, the young prince said, I am not going to marry anyone unless they are the most beautiful woman in the world. When Claudia saw him coming down towards the balcony, she thought, oh, gosh. And she dove into her bosom and pulled out a handkerchief. Its scent was amazing, and she put it and dropped it over the balcony and watched as it fluttered down and landed at the prince's feet. He picked it up. The scent could only belong to the most beautiful woman in the world. Oh, but he looked up and he couldn't see anything. So there was a door and he thought, well, if I knock on the door, maybe I could find out whose this handkerchief belongs to. And so he knocked and the door was opened a crack and he said, excuse me, this handkerchief came falling out of the sky, and I wondered if it belonged to any of the beautiful young ladies in your household. Now, Beatrix was at the door, and she said, well, if you give me the handkerchief, I perhaps could tell you who the owner was. And So he handed it over, and in the corner was the little C, Claudia. Oh yes, I know who this belongs to. Belongs to Claudia. I will tell her that you have found her handkerchief. Or could I see her? See her? Oh, no. We never come outside because we don't want to ruin our complexion, you know, and we certainly don't entertain young men until we're married. Oh. Well, you know, my father is the king, and I really would like to see Miss Claudia. Oh, said Beatrice, Your Highness, well, I will talk to Claudia, and perhaps she will agree to show you her finger tomorrow. I mean, she could probably poke it through the lock or something. Thank you. The door was closed, and he went his way home, and, you know, he was already half in love. And so he was back the next day, and he knocked on the door, and he said, I'm here. Oh, Your Majesty, Claudia has agreed to show you her finger. Now, if you back off a bit, and I'll close the door, and she will put her finger through the keyhole for you, and you may see her finger. And that's what happened. There was some little giggles behind the door as a finger in kid gloves poked its way through and moved around provocatively. He was entranced. Oh, what a slender finger, how wonderful. He would marry the woman who this belonged to, definitely he would. And he took a ring out of his pocket and stuck it on the finger. And then the door opened, and Beatrix said, you want to marry Claudia? I want to marry Claudia, please. Well, if you send your carriage tomorrow morning at 10:30, we will prepare Claudia for a wedding, and we will take your carriage to the church, and you and Claudia will be married. Oh. And he was off to the palace as fast as he could go. Oh, he was going to marry the most beautiful girl in the world, and I was so thrilled, and tomorrow morning at 10:30, the carriage was at the door. Now, the sisters had carefully put together Claudia's clothing. I mean, she was dressed sumptuously, with 7 veils over her face, so that she couldn't be seen. And they all got into the carriage, and they went to the church, and Claudia and the prince were married. Now, he wanted to take Claudia and her sisters out to dinner with his friends, but they demurred. It had been a very busy day. But he could see Claudia in the bedchamber later on, and he should go out to dinner with his friends. And so he did. And Claudia and her sisters went to the bedchamber, and they helped her change into her nightie, and they tucked her into bed with the 7 veils still over her face. Well, when the prince was let into the bedchamber, I mean, he was full of manly ardor, and he was there to consummate his marriage straight away. He didn't even look under the 7 veils. And it was only after he was spent and he was happy that he decided it might be a good idea if he looked at his wife to see how beautiful she was, because, of course, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. So he lifted the first veil, and the second, and the third, the 6th, and the 7th, and there in front of him was the most wrinkled old crone he had ever seen in his life. Oh, he had been tricked. He had been tricked. How dare anyone do this to him? He picked up that crone. He ran to the window and threw her out. And then he ran back to the bed and lay on it and pummeled his pillow with fury until he fell fast asleep. Now, meanwhile, out in the courtyard below the window, 3 fairies were going to a ball. And they stopped in astonishment as an old crone came flying out the window. Her nightie caught on a trellis that was holding up a rose, and there she fell. Came to a halt halfway between heaven, not hell, the ground, and just dangled there with not enough strength to rectify her position and not enough nightie to cover her modesty. And as she dangled there, she began to moan. Oh, this is ridiculous. How could have I been so stupid? I mean, I wanted a diversion, but this is just over the top. I mean, some of it was quite pleasant. And you know the fairies, they just... The fairies laughed, and they laughed, and they laughed until their sides ached. And the first fairy said, "What do you say, sisters? What do we give this old and wrinkled crone 3 wishes? For she's made us laugh that we haven't laughed so much in ages. I wish she lose her wrinkles, and I wish that she become the most beautiful woman in the world." And the second fairy said, me, I wish that she live a long and happy life. And me, the third fairy said, I wanted to have a long and happy marriage with lots of children. Come on now, we better get to the ball. We're going to be late. And off they went. So back up in the bedchamber, the prince woke up and he thought, oh gosh, that was a terrible dream. I dreamed that I married an old... And he looked in the bed beside him and the bed was empty. And oh no! And he ran to the window and opened it up, and there, on the rose trellis, was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. And he had, oh no! He rushed to the bed. He got a sheet. He dangled it out of the window, and between them, they managed to tie it around her waist and sort of get her back into the bedchamber, where he fell on his knees and asked for forgiveness. A bemused Claudia forgave him. And she showed him how she forgave him. Sometime later, there was a knock on the door of the bedchamber, and it was Beatrix. I wondered if you'd like coffee. Of course they'd like coffee. And so when Beatrix came in, she was carrying a tray and the coffee things, and there was the prince, and there was... who? I mean, there was a beautiful woman lying there. A beautiful woman that could have been Claudia in her younger days, and she certainly had Claudia's voice. And she wanted to know what had happened. But of course she couldn't ask because the prince was still there, and so she gave them the coffee, and then when she noticed that the prince had gone off on business, she came back and she began to pester Claudia about what had happened. how did you get rid of your wrinkles? Well, I had my head chopped off and then I got a new one. No, don't be so silly. Of course you didn't. What happened? What happened? And Beatrix kept pestering and pestering and pestering until Claudia got fed up. And she said, if you must know, I went to the carpenter and got my wrinkles planed off. And to her astonishment, and before she could do anything about it, Beatrix had turned tail and gone straight down to the carpenter. I don't know what you think, but it's kind of an extreme form of beauty treatment, don't you? And I know you're wondering, did it go well? No, it didn't go well. When Annabel came back to the castle that day and she heard about all the goings-on, she decided that was it. There were no more diversions in her life. She was going straight back to her brother's farm, and she was going to be there for the rest of her life. And what of Claudia, you might ask? What of the most beautiful woman in the world? Eventually, she and her husband became king and queen, and she was known to give advice to her husband on some states of affairs. And he would always say to her, it's so wonderful to have such a wise head, a queen with such a wise head on such young shoulders. And she would say, well, it's a good thing that I have a wise head. I've got 25 children to look after. And he would pat her hand and say, oh, he was surprised that there weren't more. And she would think, well, if there was going to be an inkling of any more, she would have to search for the fairies and get another wish. And I'm here to tell you that, as far as I know, they did live a long and happy life together. Thank you. I have a little cheat sheet here because I'm one of those people that needs a cheat sheet. First of all, I have to remind you to fill these in if you have and give them to my friend Mike Devaney. This would win you 2 tickets to come to next month's show, which is Rumpelstiltskin. I want to say 101 versions, but I'd be exaggerating. 6 probably, I think, 6 versions. So if you haven't done that, please do it. The interval will be just about 10 minutes. We want to encourage you to visit the bar and our wonderful volunteer there. Christopher, and there's Kim at the door, and there's also Gary on sound. So just let's give them a round of applause because we really appreciate them supporting us. If you need the loos, which please you feel free to use this one, or else you go straight to the back and turn left. One's upstairs and one's downstairs. And I think that's all I need to say. We're going to draw this. We'll draw this after the interval. And if you have any questions of any of us that are swanning around up here on the stage, please feel free to come and chat. We'd love to chat. Thanks. See you in 10.
Yeah, no, we'll just switch over. I'll get up. Sit wherever you want. Thank you.
All right, we ready?
Well, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you. We're going to choose a card, and actually we're going to ask one of the audience to choose it.
Well, I'm going to ask you, I'm just going to randomly pick somebody and ask you to give me a number 1 through 16.
Oh, there you go.
All right, so randomly, boom. What's the number?
Let's go with number
10.
10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and the winner, 10, is Suzanne Anderson.
Oh, well done, Suzanne. Woohoo!
Those two won it 2 months in a row. So, here's what we do. At the end of your, meet me in the back and give you all the information. All right? That's awesome.
Well done. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. You got a story to tell.
Well, funnily enough, I was talking to a lady in the audience, and she said, I said, why did you come? And she said, we won the card. Not once, not twice. Maybe we'll win a third time, you never know. I'm sorry you didn't, but I'm so glad you did. And we look forward to welcoming you back when we can see you. That would be lovely. Rumpelstiltskin's next. And that's really going to be quite exciting, I think, because every tale will be the same, but it will be different. And I'm going to be telling one of them. I chose mine because the tale came from the place where my husband's ancestors came from. And I'm not going to say any more because I'm sure you'll all come back, won't you, next month? And I'll tell you more then. Now, do you remember Annabelle? She went back to the farm and to help her brother farm. It was the best place, she decided, because everything was ordered. There were no surprises. She had a rooster, the rooster crowed, she got up in the morning, she got dressed, she went into the farmyard, she helped her brother slop out the pigs, milk the cows, and feed the chickens. No surprises. And when her brother passed away, she kept the farm going herself until she began to get the aches and pains those of us that are in an older generation feel. And it was just a little bit too much to keep the farm going herself. And she decided that she would go to the nearest market town and see if she could hire on someone just to help her keep the farm spick and span and do all the work. And so she put her bonnet on and off she went to the market town. And you know, she was lucky. There were 3 sisters who were looking for a job, and they were quite happy to share the same room as long as they had a feather bed that they could share. What they didn't tell Miss Annabelle was that they were rather more fond of feather pillows than they were of feather dusters. And what Miss Annabelle didn't tell the 3 sisters, who hated getting up early, was that she had a rooster. And every morning, the rooster crowed at sunrise. Very punctual, this rooster. She called him Bertram, after her ex-husband, her husband who'd passed away, I'm sorry. Her husband who'd passed away, who was also very punctual. And he had another thing in common with the rooster. They both crowed a lot. Sisters came to help Annabel on the farm. And they hadn't told her that they had this aversion for getting up early. So they were quite shocked when cock-a-doodle-doo! They time to get up. No time for rest. Morning is best. Cock-a-doodle-doo! Rise with the sun. Cock-a-doodle-doo! Get the work done. So as soon as Bertram cock-a-doodle-doo, Miss Annabel was up. She was running into the sisters' bedroom saying, time to get up, time to get the work done. Morning is best, morning is best. And they had to get dressed, go down into the farmyard, milk the cows, slop out the pigs, and feed the chickens. Miss Annabel insisted that this had to be done first. Every morning, oh no, I'm gonna get up again. Oh. They hated it. And along with that, they began to hate Bertram. Oh, that bird. They would have to get rid of Bertram. And so they plotted. And one night, when Miss Annabel was asleep, down into the farmyard they went. Pulled that rooster off its roost and pulled out all the tail feathers and scattered them around to make it look like a fox, and then went back to bed. Oh, not getting up tomorrow morning. Yeah. So you can imagine their surprise when, before sunrise, at the bottom of the bed there was Miss Annabel, with feathers sticking out of her bonnet, all fully dressed, going, time to get up, cock-a-doodle-doo, 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 morning is rest, morning is best, morning is best, rise with the sun, except there was no sun. Get the work done. Now, they woke up, they were half dressed, and they went down and they went into the farmyard and they got the stuff done, but oh gosh, it was awful. But they thought, well, you know, once. Morning after morning after morning, there was Miss Annabel with the feathers in her hat. Cock-a-doodle-doo, cock-a-doodle-doo, prancing backwards and forwards across the end of the bed. No, no, no. Let's get another rooster. At least we would get up at sunrise and not before sunrise. But, you know, Miss Annabel said no. She wanted to honour Bertram's memory. And so she, in the future, would do it every day. Morning is best. No time to rest. You see, Miss Annabel had this philosophy. Early to bed, early to rise, makes a woman healthy and wealthy and very wise. Thank you. And now, my fellow storyteller, the one with the beautiful shirt on.
Thank you. There was a woman who never did what anyone wanted her to do. Now, she wouldn't take charity, but she would never cheated out of what was hers either. Well, years went by, and she reached a point where she could no longer work in the fields, and so she began to sell off her furniture one by one because she needed to do that to buy rice. Well, This had gone on for a while, and she was down to 3 things. She had a cooking pot, a jar with her rice in it, and 3 cash, which are round coins with square centers, buried in the floor in her hut. When, tragedy, she dropped the jar that held the rice and broke it, and now the rice was scattered on her floor for the mice. Well, that wasn't going to happen. She carefully picked up every single grain of rice and put it in this little pouch she had, and checked through the broken jar shards, and she had 2 cups of rice. That was it, and nowhere to protect it from the mice. So she had to dig up her cash she'd been planning to use to buy more rice and buy a jar to hold what rice she had. Well, she put all the rice in this pouch, and then she took the 3 coins and she put them in the pouch with it and closed it, and it was a plump little pouch, and when you shook it, it sounded like coins rattling in it, and she put it in her sleeve. And she left the village to go to the town to buy a jar, because, well, she'd never been to town before because everything she needed was in the village. So this trip to town was the first time she'd ever gone there. When she got there, she was astonished. I mean, 2-story houses looked like mansions to her, and mansions looked like palaces. And as she walked down the street, the smells of roast duckling wafted out of one restaurant, and sweet dumplings out of another, and teas, and the smells, and her mouth was watering. She was thinking, maybe I should just spend the last of my coins on. No. Rice has always been good enough for me. Rice will be fine. She marched on down the street, and she came to a shop that was filled with vases and jars and knickknacks and bric-a-brac and all kinds of pottery things, and she thought this would probably be a place that she could find a jar. So in she went. And it was crowded with objects of art and narrow aisles, and the shopkeeper came. He saw her up towards the front of the shop, and he came towards her. He was wearing a silk robe and a silk vest and a little silk hat on his head, and he looked at her and he said, "We do not have, this is not a museum. You must get out, and this is," he was thinking she was a beggar woman, and she reached in and pulled her little pouch out and shook it. And he was, well, I did not realize that. But tell me, why, as a woman as wealthy as you, dress like a beggar? Let me show you some silks. And she said, cotton is good enough for me. It keeps me warm in the winter and cool in the summer is fine. I need a jar. He said, well, you have come to the right place. Let me show you these jars over here. These are from the Ming Dynasty. The clay that goes into these jars was dug from a pure mountain stream, and the potter only made 1 pot a year. Well, the old woman looked at them, and blue with dragons going around them. They were quite elegant, and she said, no, too fancy for what I need. Well, then let me show you these celadon pots over here, these beautiful green. This is from the Song Dynasty. And she looked at those carefully, and she said, nah, too fragile. So he showed her every jar in the shop, and they made their way down the narrow aisle to the very back of the shop. He had shown her everything. He was getting a little frustrated, and he said, well, what would you like? And she looked over, and she spotted like a crockery pot on the floor that was kind of had reddish markings on the side of it. And she said, tell me about that jar. He looked at him. That? That's catching water from a leak in the roof. She said, well, it reminds me of something my grandmother had, and so I would be interested in that. How much do you want for it? And he said, well, we want 100 cash. 100 cash? Sentiment only goes so far. She said, for heaven's sake, you said it has a crack, it leaks, and you're using it to catch water from the roof. All right, he said, all right. He picked it up and he shoved it towards her, and he said, 10 cash. Crossed her arm. He said, why would I take your old garbage? And well, this time, he was so frustrated, he just shoved the jar, and he said, take it and get out. The old woman thought, these town people do not know how to negotiate. She said, well, what are you going to pay me to take it? And he was like, you are the most ardent, obstinate woman I have ever met. Take the jar and leave. And so she carefully put it on top of her head and walked carefully out these narrow aisles so she didn't break anything on her way out. And she left town with her new jar. Well, it wasn't long before the jar felt really heavy, and she kind of was dragging it along the road at some point. And he finally needed to stop and take a rest, and she put it down, and she looked at it, and she said, I don't know where you've been. You certainly are beat up, though. And this farm woman was in her garden next to the road, and she looked up, and she saw this pot, and she said, oh, Auntie, that pot would be exactly what I need to use as a stool in my garden. I'll just flip it upside down. Oh, the old woman looked at the farmer wife and looked at the jar and thought, you have outlived your usefulness, just like me. No, I'm keeping the jar. You can get your little porcelain pot and use that as a stool. The farmer's wife said, Anna, you are the most obstinate woman in the district. Yes, said the old woman. She kept on going. Well, she decided she'd turn the jar on its side and roll it like a boulder. And she was rolling this jar that seems to be getting heavier and heavier as she goes. And I mean, it's not getting bigger, but it feels like it's getting bigger. And she keeps rolling it along. And she made up a little song to sort of make it easier to do it. She was singing, mice from the rice, mice from the rice, mice from the rice, mice from the rice. Well, a cart driver came along behind. And he saw her rolling this thing. And he said, Auntie, what is that? Is that a boulder or a jar? Well, she glanced back at the cart driver and said, I'm not your auntie, thank goodness, and it's a jar. Well, when he pulled up next to her, he looked at the jar and he said, oh, that would be perfect to break up as pavers for my road project. The old woman was like, looked at the jar and thought to herself, yeah, you've served people all your life. You're just now cast away. No, she said, and the cart driver said, I'll give you 100 cash for it. 100 cash. Oh, she could buy a jar and rice with 100 cash, but no, this jar it had worked so hard its whole life, and now it was just tossed out and beat up and imperfect, like her. So she said, no, I will take this. This jar belongs in a house. The cart driver said, you are the most stubborn, obstinate woman in the province. That I am, she said. And she continued to push the jar down the road, singing this little rice from the mice, rice from the mice, rice from the mice. And then she started talking to the jar. She said, where have you been? Have you carried oil to the Indias? Have you gone into the desert on an army wagon? What has caused you to have so many chips and nicks and flaws and cracks? You have worked so hard, and then now at the end of your life, they just cast you out, like me. Well, she began to think of the jar as a friend. Well, she got to the village fund, and in the last segment of getting to her house, she had to go up kind of a switchback road to the top of this hill where her house was. And so she began to shove this jar that was getting so heavy and so big. I mean, it seemed bigger, and she just kept and the neighbors, the villagers that are working in the fields saw her pushing this jar up the hill, and so they came and began to stand beside the road and kind of make fun of her and laugh at her and say, oh, Auntie, are you adding an addition to your house with that thing? And kidding her and joking her, and she pushed it and pushed it. Every time she'd take 2 steps, she'd slide back 1, and by the time she got to the top of the hill, she was wet and red with both the exertion and the humiliation she was feeling from the villagers making fun of her. Well, she rolled this jar down the alley and into her house and closed the door, and she just kind of fell on the floor, collapsed. She was so exhausted. But she took her pouch and she emptied the rice into the jar, and she heard the little grains clatter on the side, and she put the lid on it, and then she lay down and she just went to sleep because she was exhausted from this journey. In the morning when she got up, she looked at this jar and she thought, oh, what have I done? I could have gotten 100 cash for this jar. Was I being stupid? Well, it's too late now, so she looked into the jar, and she'd put the 2 cups of rice into the jar, and she reached in to take out a scoop of rice to have for breakfast, and it didn't seem to have diminished the amount of rice in the jar at all. She took out a second scoop, and still the same amount of rice was in the jar. So she made a bowl of rice for breakfast, and she made a bowl of rice for lunch, and she made a bowl of rice for dinner. She was eating 3 meals a day, and each time she made a meal and took rice out of the jar, she made sure to thank the jar. Well, you know, in a little village, nothing remains hidden for long. And it wasn't long before her neighbors noticed that this old woman, this poor old woman, was eating 3 meals a day. And so they began to spy on her, and finally one of the neighbors saw her patting the jar and thanking it. Well, in no time at all, the entire village was banging on her door out in her little alley where her house was, and she opened the door and she said, "What do you want?" "Oh, we want to see this jar. We want to see your jar." And she said, "You saw it when I came into the village." "Oh," and then one man, one of his neighbors, pushed forward and said, "I will give you 10 silver cash for it." And then another one came and pushed him aside. He would cheat you. "I will give you 100 gold coins for it." And a third one pushed him out of the way and said, "They would both try to cheat you. I will bring the gold. You bring the jar. We will share everything 50-50. Oh, a woman looked at them and said, "What do I need with your money? The jar gives me all the food I need. I have enough. I have everything I need. You mocked the jar when I came in. You mocked me, but magic will not be mocked, nor will I." And with that, she closed the door in their faces. Thank you. Our last storyteller tonight is Pam Maben. There you go.
Once there was a very beautiful woman who was a fine dancer, poet, singer. She thought none of the men in her village were good enough for her. She did not even call them by their own names, but ridiculed them with names like "brings home no game" or "drowned himself while kayaking." But one day, this very beautiful woman saw a stranger, a hunter, approaching her village, and she watched as he walked across the broad expanse of the tundra. And as he drew near, she could see that he was wearing a polar bear skin. Around his waist was a belt of sharp knives, and a necklace of polar bear teeth hung around his neck. He stayed in her village for some time, and in the evenings, he too could dance the dances and sing the songs, and he spoke the poems so beautifully, and she was taken with him. One day, he left the village to go hunting, and this very beautiful woman she watched, and then she began to follow him. She followed him across the tundra, and then, when he came to the edge of the tundra, he stepped out on the ice floe. And when he reached the edge of the ice floe, he just dove into that cold, cold water, swam to the next ice floe, and pulled himself up. Well, this very beautiful woman, she was afraid, but she too dove off the ice floe and swam to the next ice floe. But when she got there, and she tried to pull herself up, and she tried to pull herself up, and she tried to pull herself up, but she was so cold and so numb that she could not do it. She called out for help, but when she looked up, it was not a man she saw. That polar bear skin, it was his skin. The sharp knives were his claws, and that necklace of teeth was back in his mouth. He roared up into the sky, and then he dropped down on all fours. He lumbered off into the distance, and he disappeared. And that very beautiful woman, she could not pull herself out, and she could not pull herself out, and she could not pull herself out. And finally she had to let go, and she drifted down, down, down to the bottom of the sea. And there, in the dark and the cold, she stayed for a very long time. And every day the tides washed in and out and in and out, and with the tides came the crabs. They found her soft flesh. And what with the coming of the tides and the crabs, in time that very beautiful woman was nothing more than a skeleton. One day the tides washed in so strongly that they lifted Skeleton Woman up, 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 and threw her hands out onto the ice floe. And now she found she could pull herself out. She was so lightweight. And so she stood up and she began to walk across the ice floes, her bones clicking and clacking and rattling. The kelp that was wound around her ribs was streaming out behind her, and her black hair, covered with barnacles, was blowing in the wind. She walked across the ice floes and onto the tundra, and there, close to the edge of the tundra, she found an old abandoned hut, and she fixed it up, strengthened it with the grasses from the tundra, and just in time, for the cold winds were beginning to blow and the snow was beginning to fall. Winter was coming. So she crept into the hut, and she lay down and she slept. She slept and she dreamt, and she dreamt and she slept and she slept and she dreamt and she dreamt and she slept. She slept and she dreamt for a very long time. She slept until she could feel the warm air. She slept until she could hear the birds sing, for then she knew that spring had come. But still she stayed in that hut for some time. And one day, looking out, she saw two young men. They were hunters coming by on a track close to her, and she called out to them, "Come, and I will feed you." But when they arrived at the hut, they screamed. They were terrified. They ran back to their village, and that night, in their village, they saw their father, and they said to him, "Something very strange happened to us today. We were out hunting, and we saw this woman, and she offered us food, but when we went to her hut, we found that she was nothing but bones." Now, their father was an old man, a shaman, a medicine man whose wife had died long ago. And he said to his sons, now that sounds like a woman I would like to meet." So the next day, he took his frame drum, because when the Inuit people travel a long way, they play these frame drums, and he walked and he drummed and he drummed and he walked and he walked and he drummed and he drummed and he walked. And in time, Skeleton Woman, she could feel that drumming in his bones. He drummed and he walked and he walked and he drummed and he walked and he walked until he came to her hut, and he called out to her. She went, "Go away! I'm nothing but bones." "I'm nothing but an old man," he said. "It doesn't matter." Well, it took all of Skeleton Woman's courage, but she stood up and went out and stood before him, nothing but bones. It didn't matter. They began to talk, and they went into the hut, and they talked for a long time. They talked about many things. And finally, the old man said, I have this frame drum, and sometimes when I play it, people like to dance." She said, "I've forgotten how to dance." But he began to play the drum, and as he played and he played, Skeleton Woman, she began to remember how she had once moved, and as he played, and she stood there dancing as he played all that night. He played all the next day, and she danced all the next night, and all the next day, and all the next night, and all the next day, and all the next night. And in the morning, he flung open the flap of the hut, and the sun came streaming in. And Skeleton Woman could see that the flesh was back on her bones again. She could see that her hair was as shiny as it had ever been. She said to the man, "Now you give me that drum." And she took the drum and she said to him, "Now you dance." And she played, and he danced, and she played, and he danced until his arms were strong, his eyes were bright, and his heart was soulful. And that man and that woman, they danced all the way back to the village, dancing from death back into life again, from death back into life again. And the Inuit people say that whenever you hear a frame drum, what you are really hearing is that man and that woman dancing through death back into life again. From death back into life again. Thank you. I'd like to call my fellow Crone tellers back up to join me. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you for sharing this evening with us. And please join us next month. I think it's going to be, several of us are going to be back next month with a variant of Rumpelstiltskin. One story told in many different cultures. I think it'll be a fascinating evening. And we'd also like to thank the volunteers from Artichoke Music who have helped us so much tonight. Please remember to tip them on their way out. They're volunteers. Have a wonderful evening. Hope to see you next month.